Okay, so get this right. What happens when the people who are supposed to be stopping crime are actually the ones committing it?
Hmm.
That's what we're looking at today. We're going to be diving into a story about the EFCC in Nigeria.
Okay.
That's the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, just in case
Right.
you're not familiar with it. They're the main agency that tackles fraud and corruption.
Right.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
We've got a whole stack of news articles saying that they just fired 27 of their own officers
Well,
for fraudulent activities and misconduct.
that's crazy.
Yeah. So we're going to try to figure out what is really going on here and what this means for the fight against corruption in Nigeria.
It's pretty wild, 27 officers.
Wow.
That's not just like a couple of bad apples.
Okay.
That really makes you think there's a much bigger problem within the agency itself.
Yeah, and it gets even more interesting. One of the articles mentions a $400,000 claim
Oh,
against a sectional head from supposedly another EFCC staff member. This isn't someone just like stealing paper clips or something. This is what kind of internal conflicts are we even talking about here?
yeah.
What could this mean? Could this be like a sign of deeper corruption within the EFCC?
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking about how an organization like the EFCC operates. There's a lot of power there, right?
Yeah,
Power to investigate, seize assets, potentially even make or break people's careers.
right.
And, that kind of power can be very tempting.
Yeah.
And if there aren't strong checks and balances,
Oh, yeah.
it can easily become a breeding ground for corruption.
So you're saying this like $400,000 claim,
Yeah.
this could be a sign of a bigger power struggle going on within the EFCC.
Possibly, yeah.
Mm.
Like different factions all vying for control
Oh,
and
wow.
potentially even using those positions for personal gain.
Yeah,
And it's not just theoretical. We see this happen all over the world
right.
with anti-corruption agencies.
Mm.
When you have that much power concentrated in just a few hands,
Yeah.
it creates a lot of opportunities for abuse.
So we've got like this potential corruption inside the agency itself,
Yeah.
but it doesn't even stop there. The EFCC is also claiming that they're being targeted by like a blackmail ring.
What?
Yeah, where people are using the chairman's name to extort money from, all these high-profile suspects.
Wow.
Yeah, and they even arrested two people who were trying to get $1 million
$1 million?
out of a former Nigerian Ports Authority bigwig.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and they were saying that they would give him like a soft landing
Jeez.
if he paid them the cash.
That's a serious operation.
I know, $1 million.
So blackmail often really relies on fear, right? And desperation. So they might threaten to expose some damaging information or even fabricate evidence
Oh, wow.
or leverage existing investigations to pressure people into paying up. It's all about exploiting vulnerability.
So they might be targeting people who are already under investigation
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
EFCC because they know they're already.
They're already vulnerable. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're preying on that fear. They want to avoid prosecution at all costs. And basically what they're doing is saying, pay us, and this will all go away.
Oh, man. So how does this all connect back to the officers that were fired? Could some of those accusations be coming from people who are just trying to discredit the EFCC to avoid prosecution?
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
Think about it. If you can paint the agency as corrupt, as untrustworthy,
Right.
it really weakens any case that they might have against you. It just throws doubt on all of their investigations.
Mm.
They could potentially give you a lot more leverage to negotiate a better outcome for yourself.
Wow, so it's like a counteroffensive. It's like the corrupt officials fighting back against the people who are trying to expose them.
Exactly, yeah.
But how can you tell what's a genuine accusation and what's just like a manipulation tactic?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah,
And it's what makes this whole situation so much more difficult to sort of unpack and understand.
right?
You have to consider everyone's motives.
Yeah.
Don't take anything at face value.
Okay, so we've got these internal firings, which seem to point to some pretty serious problems within the EFCC itself. But then we have all these external forces potentially trying to just undermine the agency for their own personal gain.
Yeah, it's a tangled web.
It's a tangled web, yeah.
And to make it even more complex, the articles that we have, they don't actually give us any specific names or details about the officers who were fired.
Wait, so we don't even know who these 27 officers are
No.
or what they even did?
Not from these articles.
Mm.
And I think that lack of transparency is really going to erode public trust in the EFCC.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. If they were serious about cleaning up their act, why wouldn't they be more open about it?
That's a really great question.
Yeah,
And it's something we should keep in mind as we kind of delve deeper into all of this.
definitely.
What does this lack of transparency really tell us about their commitment to accountability?
Okay, so we've got a lot to unpack here. We've got the firings that expose this potential corruption within the EFCC, but then we also have these blackmail attempts
Right.
that just muddy the waters even more
Yeah.
and make it really hard to tell who to trust.
Yeah, it's like trying to solve a puzzle
I know.
where all the pieces keep changing.
Yeah. But that's what makes it so fascinating, right?
Yeah, it is.
We're not just looking at a few isolated incidents here. We're getting a glimpse into how complex and frankly how murky this world of fighting corruption really is.
Yeah.
And I think what makes it even more important is understanding how this impacts the fight against corruption in Nigeria as a whole.
And that's exactly what we're going to be looking at next. We'll explore the wider context of all of this.
Okay.
Corruption in Nigeria and what it means for the future of the EFCC and, well, for the people they're supposed to be protecting. So buckle up because this deep dive is about to get a lot more interesting. All right. You know, it's fascinating how this whole situation with the EFCC kind of mirrors these broader challenges of fighting corruption,
Yeah.
especially in a country like Nigeria.
Okay, so unpack that for me. What do you mean by, like, mirrors?
We have this agency that's supposed to be like the champion for integrity, right?
Right.
But then at the same time, they're struggling with all this corruption within their own ranks.
Yeah.
And then they're also being targeted by these powerful people who are trying to protect their own interests.
Yeah.
It's almost like a microcosm of this larger fight against corruption, where you often see those exact same dynamics playing out.
So it's like a constant battle on multiple fronts. You're trying to root out corruption,
Yeah.
but you're also dealing with all this pushback from these people in power. And then you also have to watch out for all the potential problems
Right.
within your own organization.
Exactly. It's a super complex and multifaceted challenge.
Yeah.
And it's going to require a lot more than just catching a few bad apples, so to speak.
Right.
You need systemic changes, strong institutions, and a real culture of accountability.
What about the people who are caught in the middle of all of this? You know, everyday Nigerians who are relying on the EFCC to protect them from all these financial crimes.
Yeah.
How does all of this impact how they view the agency?
I mean, I think it's understandable that they might feel a little disillusioned
Yeah.
and distrustful, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, when the very people who are supposed to be upholding the law
Yeah.
are being accused of breaking it,
Right.
it really erodes the public's faith in the entire system.
And that lack of transparency we talked about earlier
Yeah.
really doesn't help. If you don't even know who these officers are
Right.
or what they did, it's hard to feel like justice is being served.
Absolutely. I think transparency is just so crucial, not just for holding individuals accountable,
Right.
but for rebuilding that trust in the institution itself.
So how do we move forward from here if the very agency tasked with fighting corruption can be corrupted itself?
Right.
Where do we even go? How do we make sure there's accountability when the watchdogs themselves need watching?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
But I think first we have to acknowledge how complex this problem really is.
Okay.
We can't just focus on punishing individuals.
Right.
We need to fix the systemic issues that allow corruption to take root in the first place.
So what would that look like in practice? What kind of systemic changes are we talking
Well,
about?
for starters, you need strong institutions
Okay.
with clear mandates and oversight mechanisms
Right.
and independent bodies that can investigate these allegations
Uh-huh.
without fear of any kind of reprisal. You need a legal framework
Right.
that makes it a lot harder to get away with these financial crimes.
And you need a culture of accountability, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Where people are able to speak out against any wrongdoing, and there are real consequences for people who abuse their power.
Exactly. It's about creating a system where corruption isn't just seen as, well, inevitable
Right.
or the way things are done.
Yeah.
We need to foster a belief that things can actually be different,
Okay.
that integrity matters, and that everyone is accountable for what they do.
That sounds like a monumental task, though.
Yeah.
Especially in a country like Nigeria where corruption's been so deeply ingrained.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. It's going to require a long-term commitment
Yeah.
and a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah.
But I think we have to remember that change is definitely possible. We've seen it in other countries
Okay.
that have faced similar challenges. It takes political will, public pressure, and a willingness to challenge how things have always been done.
So it's not just about catching the bad guys.
No,
It's about making it harder for corruption to happen in the first place.
precisely. It's about prevention as much as punishment.
Okay.
It's about building that culture of
Yes.
integrity and accountability where corruption just won't be tolerated.
What about the role of the media in all of
Oh,
this?
yeah.
These articles we've been talking about,
Right.
they play a key role in exposing corruption
Ah,
and holding those in power accountable.
yeah, free and independent media is so essential.
Right.
It shines a light on all the wrongdoing,
Yeah.
and it keeps the public informed. Investigative journalism can be so powerful in exposing corruption and bringing about change.
But even with a free press, it can still be hard to separate fact from fiction,
Oh, yeah.
especially when you've got all these powerful individuals trying to control the narrative.
Right.
So how do we as informed citizens navigate all of this?
I mean, it all comes down to critical thinking, right?
Okay.
You have to be skeptical of the information you're given, especially when it's coming from sources that might have their own agenda.
Okay.
Look at the evidence, consider everybody's motives, and get as many different perspectives as you can.
It's like being a detective. You're piecing all these clues together,
Yeah.
trying to figure out what really happened.
That's exactly what it's like. And that's why this case is just so fascinating.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about the EFCC
Right.
or even just corruption in Nigeria.
Yeah.
This is about how we fight corruption everywhere
Mm.
and how we as citizens can be more informed and more engaged
Yeah.
in holding our leaders accountable.
Okay, so we've talked about all the complexities of fighting corruption and the challenges that the EFCC is facing
Yeah.
and the need for more transparency and accountability.
Right.
But there's one more thing I think we need to touch on. We've been talking about, institutions and systems.
Right.
But what about the individual? What about personal responsibility in all of this?
That's a great point. It's something that often gets overlooked
Yeah.
when we talk about corruption.
Yeah.
We always focus on the big picture,
Right.
the institutions, the systems, but at the end of the day,
Yeah.
corruption happens because individuals make choices.
So even with the best systems in place,
Yeah.
it still comes down to a person's integrity.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
You could have the strongest laws,
Okay.
the most independent oversight, but if individuals are still willing to take bribes
Right.
or abuse their power or look the other way,
Yeah.
corruption is going to continue.
That makes sense. But how do you cultivate that kind of personal integrity,
Hmm.
especially in a society where corruption might be seen as just the norm or even like a necessary thing to get ahead?
It's tough. It's
Yeah.
a really complex issue. There's no easy fix. But I think it starts with education
Yeah.
and awareness.
Yeah.
People need to understand what corruption really costs,
Yeah.
how it hurts development, how it breaks down trust,
Hmm.
and just perpetuates all these inequalities.
So it's not enough to just tell people, hey, corruption's wrong.
Right.
You have to show them how it actually affects their lives.
Exactly. You have to connect those dots
Yeah.
between things like good governance
Right.
and how people actually live their everyday lives.
Yeah.
When people can see how corruption affects their health care,
Right.
their education, even just basic services,
Yeah.
they're much more likely to demand better.
So it's about empowering people to hold their leaders accountable.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And that can come from a lot of places. A free press,
Uh-huh.
strong civil society groups
Yeah.
that advocate for transparency and accountability.
And it can come from individuals too, right?
Yeah.
People who are brave enough to speak up.
Exactly. It takes a lot of courage to stand up to people in power,
Right.
but every voice matters. It all chips away at that culture of impunity
Mm.
and sends a really strong message that this will not be tolerated.
So bringing it back to the EFCC
Yeah.
and this whole situation we've been talking about,
Right.
what does it mean for the future?
I think it just highlights how important it is to take a multifaceted approach.
Okay.
The EFCC needs to address what's going on internally and really commit to being more transparent.
Right.
But there needs to be a bigger shift in society overall
Mm.
towards integrity and accountability.
And that requires a lot of different people and groups to all work together.
Absolutely.
It's individuals making ethical choices.
Yeah.
It's institutions having better oversight.
Uh-huh.
It's the media exposing the truth.
Exactly. It's a collective effort. Everyone has to be on board.
So this isn't just a story about, some corrupt officers or a blackmail ring. It's about all the challenges we face
Yeah.
when we try to fight corruption and how we need to completely rethink how we approach this problem.
Yeah. This is a story that's still being written.
You know?
It is. What happens next depends on the choices that we make as individuals, as institutions, as a society.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Huh.
what's like the one thing you want to leave the listener with?
I think it's this fighting corruption. It's not spectator sport.
Hmm.
Everybody needs to be involved.
Okay.
It's about demanding accountability, speaking out against any wrongdoing,
Yeah.
and just making ethical choices in our own lives.
And even small actions can make a difference, right?
Absolutely.
It's about believing that change is actually possible
Mm-hmm.
and working towards a future where corruption isn't just inevitable, it's something that we can overcome. So to our listener, we leave you with this. What role will you play in all of this? How are you going to use your voice, your actions, your choices
Right.
to make a more just and equitable world? The answer, as always, lies with you.